Okay, we should be live.
All right, hello everyone. It sounds like we're live and our stream is ready to go. So with that, we're going to go ahead and begin our meeting. I wanted to start by taking a roll call of sorts, just of the people that are in the GoToMeeting part of the meeting. For those of you that may be watching on the stream, we'll get to a time for you to have comments later, and at that time, of course, we'll record them. But for now, just trying to get who's here from the committee. And I'm going to go ahead and call out who I have, and if I missed you, please let me know, either verbally or through our chat. So I have Shannon Stannis, Lynn Nelson, and Amy Kristen Presson. Did I miss anyone? If I did, please speak up now. All right, I'm not seeing anyone. So some people may trickle in later. That sort of tends to happen with this meeting, and that's okay. We'll get them at that time. But the first order of business would be to approve the minutes from our last meeting, which was our June 10th meeting. And I'm going to go ahead and see if I can scroll through and show those. I'll have to pull them up here. Sorry, give me just a minute. I'll make sure I have these up. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. All right, so these would be the minutes from last meeting. We talked about these small wind turbines, and then had a brief discussion of the thoroughfare plan, and then question comment period. So I would entertain a motion from someone on the committee to approve those minutes.
This is Amy. I move to approve them.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Can I get a second?
This is Lynn. I'm seconding.
Great, thank you. So with that, I suppose I'd have to go through and formally do a vote. It looks like we got Jean who joined us. Okay, so Shannon, do you vote to approve the minutes, yes or no?
Yeah, I vote to approve the minutes.
Okay, Lynn?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
And Jean?
Yes.
All right, the minutes are approved. Thank you. So we're going to move into kind of our program for this meeting now, and we're actually going to do this in a little bit different order than I have it listed. The first item I have is a thoroughfare plan update, and the second is the Metropolitan Transportation Plan survey update. I'm actually going to talk about the survey first, and then we're going to go into the thoroughfare plan because that's going to be a bit of the longer part of this meeting. So as far as the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, so what we kind of wanted to do was reach out with a survey and see what kind of feedback we could get from the community. So if you guys remember, a couple months ago, we sent that out not only to you guys, but also put that out through some of our social media outlets. And we're really very pleased with the results we got. We got almost 600 respondents to that between the English and the Spanish version. So that was great. I want to thank everyone who was able to participate in that. I know some of the people on the committee told me that they did take the survey themselves, which is awesome. Always glad to hear your feedback. And I also had some people tell me that they were able to distribute it through their own websites or post links to some of our outlets where we had it posted and so on. So I just want to thank you guys for your help with that. It was really great to kind of get that distributed. And yeah, so that's where we are with that. The survey is still open as of right now. It will stay open until noon or so tomorrow. And at that time it will close. And then after that, we're gonna run some analysis, formal analysis on the results and post what we got in terms of feedback and so on onto our social media outlets where we distributed the survey. And that'll kind of end this first part of the process. And then we're going to go into a phase 2 of the process, and phase 2 kind of involves diving down a little deeper and getting some more feedback on some of these individual items. And because we still have the pandemic ongoing, that's also going to be done through an online survey as well. So you will see another request to take a survey come out in the same kind of places where we posted it before. So again, we would love to have your feedback on that once we get it ready. It might be a little bit because we have to still wrap up stuff from this phase 1, as I'm calling it, but then we'll go ahead and launch into phase 2 with the next survey, and then continue to get some great feedback from you guys, and that will be incorporated into our transportation plan, which will be coming out sometime in 2022. So still pretty early on in the process, but always appreciate everyone's feedback and help on this. So I wanted at this time to see if there are any questions or comments that anyone from the public had about that survey. It was distributed with a packet. I'm going to kind of flip through just to show anyone who hasn't seen it what it looks like. This is kind of the format here where it has a question and then a statement about what the question is really trying to get at, as well as a picture. People who participated in this survey were asked to rank how important they thought each of these different categories were. So this first one you see here, enhancing transportation options and accessibility for all users. So if that was very important, important, not important, or less important, or undecided, there was an undecided option as well. Improving safety for all users, so on and so on. So if there are any comments as I flip through this, now would be the time. I'll leave a little bit of time as well for people who are on our stream if they would like to comment. Have we received any comments on our stream? I'm getting a no from my tech person. All right, well, with that, then it sounds like there weren't any comments from the committee, which is fine. So we're going to move on to our next item, which is a discussion of the thoroughfare plan. And so I have a PowerPoint presentation I'm going to start with. I would ask that anyone who does have questions and comments would hold them till the end of the presentation, just so that we can kind of get to those in a timely manner. So same thing for those on the chat. If you do want to post those on our stream, that's fine, but just know that it may be at the end of the presentation before they get answered, but you can post them on the stream at any time that is convenient for you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and launch into this update, and it's going to kind of just basically share with everyone what's going on with the thoroughfare plan update, kind of some broad terms and some of our goals and what we're trying to do with this update, just so that everyone knows where we're going. And then we'd like to get some of your feedback at the end of the presentation about if we're going in the right direction or if there are some additional things that you might like us to investigate. All
Hey,
right.
Tim,
Yeah, go ahead.
we did just get a question on the survey. Did you want to answer that at the end?
Oh, survey. Okay. Sorry, we're going to pause just a second. I just heard that we got a question on the survey. So go ahead and read that off for me, Arya.
Okay. Let me find that here. Okay, Meredith Eileen asks, what was found to be the most important to people who took the survey?
Yes, that's a good question. So we don't have the final results yet. So far, I'm going to go ahead and go back here to that real quick. So far, we have a few that scored pretty highly in terms of what was found to be important. This first one, transportation options and accessibility for all users, scored very highly. Safety, I believe last time I looked at the results, was the front runner by just a little bit, but we've gotten some more input since then. Those two scored pretty highly. Sidewalks, trails, and bike lanes was up there as well. Transit scored pretty well, I think. Yeah, so those were some of them that scored well, but those results will be posted and distributed on our social media platforms, so we can get a little bit better analysis of how people responded to it at that time once it's closed at noon tomorrow. And then I do want to mention, I guess, that all of these things are important in some sense, so it's not like none of them, or we're going to exclude some of them just because they didn't score as well as others. All of these things are important. It's just a matter of trying to prioritize between them when we have certain choices to make, especially in terms of spending funding. So that would be one area where this survey would help us, as well as in our second phase, when we see that survey, then we're going to look at how we can accomplish some of those goals and what the best ways are that can help the community to achieve some of those goals. Was that the only question we had, or did we get anything else? Okay. All right, so back to the thoroughfare plan. We're just kind of jumping back to that. Okay, so one thing that the plan really wants to do is to encourage multimodal travel. So it really beefs up a lot of the standards for bicycle, pedestrian, and transit infrastructure. So specifically, sidewalks, trails, as well as bus pull-offs are some pretty big elements that we work to incorporate in the plan and kind of standardize. In the past, there haven't been as many formal standards for these sorts of things, but we think that they're important to the community. So we believe that being a little more strict on what kind of design we allow to get good design is important. And when we're going to build them, when we're going to include them, the plan goes over that. And as well, it also has provisions for things like bike lanes, sharrows, and signage to help make people aware of perhaps areas where they might want to watch out for a pedestrian crossing or things along those lines. So we didn't necessarily have as many formal standards for those things. So we're really trying to buckle down and make sure that everything is more consistent throughout the community so that people can use those types of facilities to get around in a good way. All right, so then the next item is sidewalks. So I specifically wanted to cover sidewalks to let you know what direction we're headed with those. So this plan requires sidewalks in all new subdivisions and developments. So this does include sidewalks around the perimeter of a subdivision. This is something that might not necessarily be intuitive to some people as to why we're requiring it. So I gave the example of walking to the grocery store. So if you want to get from your house or place of residence, maybe an apartment, condo, whatever, to the grocery store, you can't just get there usually by walking in your neighborhood. You have to go outside of your neighborhood. So in order to be able to safely make that trip, you need a sidewalk around the perimeter of the subdivision, and then you need a way to get from that sidewalk to the development, maybe a strip center or something where the store might be, and then be able to get there safely and without having to worry about am I going to get hit by a vehicle who doesn't see me or something along those lines? So what we're really trying to do with this is increase connectivity. We want to make it so that people can take a full trip from their home or other place of residence, may not necessarily be a house, to a destination. So that could be grocery store, could be a public facility such as a library, maybe someone wants to take some kids to the park, something along those lines. And then as far as the standards, we want to make sure that the sidewalks conform to what are called PROAG standards. So I realize that's a term that you guys may not be familiar with. So PROAG is something that is set by the United States Access Board, and it requires a sidewalk width of 5 to 6 feet. So 5 feet would be the minimum. In some cases, wider than that would be desired depending on the situation. And accessibility is also very important. We need to make sure that users with some mobility challenges can use these facilities as well. So curb cuts, ramps, for people with wheelchairs, things along those lines are also very important. So any sidewalks that would be constructed under this plan would have to conform to these standards, which are well accepted standards, as you can see, because we're using the United States Access Board standards. So that's that for sidewalks. So I have a couple pictures here that I wanted to show to kind of illustrate what we're looking at here. So the first picture on the left, you see 2 adults walking side by side on this 5-foot sidewalk. One thing I do want to point out is that between the sidewalk and the curb, there is a 2-foot grass utility strip. Now, under our plan, in many cases, that utility strip or clear zone, as we're going to talk about later, which is another term for that sort of separation between a sidewalk and a curb, is probably going to be wider than 2 feet in many situations. But I thought this picture that I found was pretty good from the League of American Bicyclists in terms of illustrating what we see with the importance of making sure that it's wide enough for people to use. And then the other picture on this slide, I guess maybe more of a diagram or a drawing, is about accessibility for the route. So that was kind of the second thing that I talked about on the last slide, was accessibility. So as this suggests, 60 inches is the minimum, so that was 5 feet. 67 inches would be closer to a best practice. That's a little bit of an unusual number, 5 feet 7 inches. But that's why for the plan we kind of said 5 to 6 feet depending on the situation. So again, 67 inches, a little bit of a strange number, but for people who do have accessibility and mobility challenges, we do need to make sure that those people can use the facility as well. So that's what we based those standards on. So then trails, another very important thing. So separate from this document, we also have a trail plan. So if a trail is planned, it must be built when development or redevelopment occurs. So when someone comes in and they want to propose a project, if in their project area a trail has been planned, then that trail will have to be built to a 10-foot width would be the required width of that. And that is based on the Indiana Design Manual. And I have the section listed there for reference, but that is the recommended design width from the Indiana Department of Transportation. So that is why we chose 10 feet. It's not random. So that's what's going on with trails. And again, one of the goals with this, similar to sidewalks, is we want to make sure that we have connectivity and that people can use these safely to get from whatever their starting point would be to their destination and back safely. So in order to do that, we don't want things that are piecemeal and places where someone can use a trail in some parts of their trip, but then have to maybe go into the street or a much more dangerous situation. And so that's what we're looking at with trails. And then, so other bicycle pedestrian infrastructure. So bike lanes, sharrows, and other signage are permitted in this plan. These are going to be a little different though than sidewalks and trails in that they won't necessarily be required in developments. This will be something that will be more at the discretion of the local government engineers. As we've been developing this plan, we've been talking to them, trying to make sure that what we put together is something that they're comfortable with. And in those discussions, it kind of came out that these tend to be types of things that they wanted to have a little more control over, and it's not very easy to standardize where these items are required. So we wanted to give the design experts, the government engineers, the chance to weigh in on this and be involved in the process. And they agreed that they thought that that would be a good approach as well. So that's where that comes from. So transit infrastructure. So this is something that's still a little bit of a work in progress. The plan does set standards for transit pull-offs. So when a transit pull-off needs to be included somewhere, we need to make sure that it's of an appropriate width that a bus can get in there. And so people can safely embark or disembark from the bus and not disrupt traffic too much. Another thing that we would really like your feedback on, and again, I would ask that we hold this till later, but I do want to make this a talking point, is shelters at bus stops. So what we might do to require those, what do you guys think about? Should be some minimum requirements for shelters, those sorts of things. And then any feedback that you give us tonight, we will take to our committee meetings and start some conversations with City Bus about what can be done to accomplish some of the desires of the community in terms of shelters and what those need to look like to make sure that people could have those amenities where they're needed. Okay, so another one, and this one I think might not necessarily be quite as obvious to everyone, is loading zones. So you may wonder, well, why are we regulating loading zones? And the reason is because vehicles that are loading or unloading can block traffic lanes. So consider the following situation. You have a 2-lane road and someone is parked in one of the lanes. So that reduces our 2-lane road to a 1-lane road. And now people who are in the lane where the loading or unloading vehicle is will have to change lanes. Additionally, pedestrians or people who are trying to cross the street now have an obstacle that's screening them from view of the vehicles that are trying to change lanes, as well as it screens the view of both the pedestrian, so they can't see the oncoming traffic as well potentially, as well as the view of the oncoming traffic of the pedestrian. So that creates a potentially dangerous situation, as well as generally disrupts traffic flow. So what this plan does to solve that is to make sure that loading zones are either put in alleys, which would be the preference, or if that's not an option, that a parking spot would be designated specifically as a loading zone so that we can kind of control where vehicles are loading and unloading, and that will hopefully kind of get around some of the problems with blocking off the view of pedestrians trying to cross the street. So that's how the plan currently handles it. So another important thing that this plan talks about is sustainability in infrastructure. So yesterday, we had a conference, a statewide conference regarding resilience and sustainability in infrastructure. There were a few other topics, but that was the general theme of the conference. And the way that this plan tries to work towards that is by requiring things like clear zones, which are what I mentioned earlier with the sidewalk, and we will see another example of this on the next slide. But so creating those clear zones not only gives a buffer for pedestrians, but it provides a great opportunity to put in some green infrastructure. So things like street trees, you can get rain gardens in there, and sometimes bioswales as well would be another one. Sometimes you do see those things in medians as well. Plantings and medians are also another place we can put them. But it is very important to make sure that we are conscious of where our stormwater runoff is going, where, any kind of greenhouse gases might be, we can have some opportunity to mitigate some of those temperature concerns, so on, all those sorts of things. This is a very big topic that's maybe a little bit too big for me to get into all the reasons why putting in green infrastructure and making it sustainable is important. But for the purposes of this plan, we do want to include standards for those things. And what the plan does is that it kind of ties into some of our other local ordinances that are established and will be established regarding some of those things like clear zones. So drainage and technical design requirements are the things that we're really looking to increase with this plan. And our next slide that I'm going to go to here shows kind of what I'm trying to talk about. So this is an example of a clear zone. So the clear zone is what I have highlighted in the box, and that does a couple different things. So what we can see here is that, first of all, it kind of provides some separation between the pedestrians and the curbs. The pedestrians don't feel like they're walking right next to traffic, so it gives a feeling of safety, which is very important, as well as it provides a nice spot for potential amenities. So you can maybe just barely see this, but in the bottom right corner of the picture, it looks to me like there's a place where someone can maybe park a bike, which is good. Obviously, we want bicycle parking. We want to encourage that, as well as you can see this nice tree that we have that has been planted here. And so that, again, kind of just showing that this is a great opportunity to put some green infrastructure in those clear zones. And so this is kind of what we would hope to see with this plan, is something like this. So I have a couple examples of what potential designs could look like. We have some kind of graphical renderings here. So this is an example for an urban street. So what you kind of see in the center is you would have two 11-foot lanes. One of the reasons why we're using 11-foot lanes here instead of another number is that those are kind of about the minimum where bus drivers really feel comfortable. A bus can fit in a 10.5-foot lane, but what we've been told from our conversations with the bus company is that 10.5 is kind of a tight squeeze for them. They really prefer 11. So that's where we got the 11-foot lane. And then there are 8-foot parking areas on each side of the street. And so that kind of provides a little bit of a separation between the travel lanes and people on the sidewalk, as well as making sure that people have a place to park to get to destinations, which is very important in an urban setting. We also have, so that's actually a 2.5-foot curb and gutter where you see the 2+. So that's what that area is. So the curb and gutter is very important to make sure that in an urban area, it gets into the sewer, that drain it, runoff and storm or water and such gets to the appropriate drainage areas. So we do require curb and gutters in any urban area in this plan. That's something that was mostly in the last plan that's carried over, but been slightly improved in this update, just to make it a little more clear where those are required. And then what you will see is the total width of the sidewalk is 13.5 feet. So that includes a 7.5-foot buffer, as well as a 6-foot walkway. So the 7.5-foot buffer, that's where that clear zone that I was talking about on the last slide would come in. That would be the place where, as you can see on this rendering, there's a bicycle that can be parked there on one side of the street on the left side. On the right side, you see some people sitting at a table. Perhaps they're out by a restaurant, as well as some nice examples of some trees that have been planted there. So the width of the buffer being 7.5 feet would be subject to local standards. 7.5 feet is the maximum that we would see anywhere. They can be smaller. That is, again, subject to some other ordinances that we have in place here locally. So this plan recommends that those are, requires that those are followed. And this was just one potential example of what something might, what a street might look like in an urban context. So here is another potential example. So this is a more rural context. So what we have here is, again, two 11-foot travel lanes. And then we kind of have the shoulder. So we have a 6-foot little transition paved area for our shoulder, and then a 14-foot ditch, really, I guess, would be the most accurate description for that. And then from there, we go down to another buffer zone by our sidewalk. This time it's only 5 feet, but again, we do see some plantings there. We see some trees. So encouraging green infrastructure, which is something we want to do. And we do see a 6-foot walk in this example. So now we also see on the sides here a 19-foot setback. Now, I'm not 100% sure if that's going to stay or not. That's something that we're still in the process of deciding on. And so that may or may not stay if we, want to keep that. We may kind of lump in part of the setbacks that are required in our zoning ordinances to the sidewalk and walkway. That would be my guess as to where this is going to go in the final form. This part is still a little bit under consideration, but these are just examples anyway, so don't take them as 100% faithful of what's going to be in the final plan, but they are pretty close at least. So I just wanted to kind of give a chance to give some practical examples of what you might see when this plan is implemented. All right, so this is my last slide. So we're getting ready for the question and answer part that I promised, as well as putting together a committee recommendation. So while I wait for people to type in some questions, I'm going to kind of go over what I mean when I say committee recommendation. So what we're hoping we will get is this committee to state what items they feel are important to include in this plan. So they could be some of these things that I have listed here on this slide as potential prompts for things that could be important, but they could be other things. So maybe there's something in here that you feel we missed that we should have covered more specifically, or that should be included in the plan. And then what we're going to do is take these comments and we're going to take them to two of our committees, our policy board, which is one that our elected officials sit on. So that would be people like mayors, county commissioner, council members, those sorts of people. And then our technical committee as well, which is one that includes law enforcement officers, city engineers, representatives from Purdue, those types of folks. So this recommendation that you guys put together here tonight, after we do the Q&A, will be going to those committees, and that will help to get their input so that we can kind of say, okay, this is what we have come up with as the Area Plan Commission. And then from that, here is what our Citizens Participation Committee and the public thought was important. And so now let's see what you guys think is important. So it's just part of our process of reviewing this plan and making sure that we have all our I's dotted and T's crossed before we get to the final adoption of this plan, which will then have a chance for the public to fully review and comment on it. So I don't want anyone to think that we're leaving that part out. This is just trying to get us to a point where we have the public involved before the plan is final. That's the reason why we're doing it this way. And this is one mechanism that we thought would be a good way to gather that feedback from people. All right, so with that, I will take any questions and answer questions at this time, either from the committee or if there have been any questions or comments in the stream. And then after that, we'll jump into the drafting, I guess, this recommendation.
We'll let the committee have questions first, and then I'll read from Facebook and YouTube.
I have a question. This is Gene.
Okay, go ahead, Gene.
Or question, comment. On the loading zone, is there a amount of use of a loading zone that's going to be taken into account before a loading zone is installed? Because otherwise, someplace that if this loading zone is going to get used for 15 minutes once every couple of weeks, it's wasting potential good parking spaces if it's along the street. So there needs to be some compromise as to when a good use of a loading zone is. And you're always going to have the street blocked at times because of service people or repair people or whatever. UPS or FedEx stopping. So you're never going to get rid of some traffic disruptions, but there just shouldn't just waste spaces in some very key areas necessarily for loading zones that are infrequently used.
Yes, so I did want to address that. So first of all, thank you for your comment, and you make a very good point. That is absolutely correct, that is an issue of losing potential parking. So I guess the first thing that I would say is that this will mostly be applicable in downtown areas, which is where we've seen a lot of these types of issues occur. And additionally, the way that it will be done is that loading zones will be marked as temporary parking. So if someone wants to park there who is not using the loading zone, they would be subject to a time limit. So that would ensure that those spaces are potentially clear at times when loading would be needed. And it is going to require some compromises, you're right. And that is why we prefer that loading would happen in alleys. So we're going to work when development and redevelopment comes to work that in so that those vehicles can be safe, so that the people who are loading, unloading whatever products they need to for the businesses are able to do their job safely, as well as try to minimize the disruption to public the public right of way. But you're right, it is, we're never going to fully get those out of the way. It's just trying to improve something that we've observed has been an issue in certain areas of the community.
You also don't know what the vehicle type is being loaded, if it's a van or if it's a panel truck or a semi.
Right, yes, that's also true. And that is going to depend on what types of uses are adjacent to these areas. So some uses will require larger vehicles like the semis. Some will take smaller ones like a panel truck or a van, yes. So that is something that's going to be taken into account as well. And this plan will have a lot of input from the local government engineers as far as this. We've had some conversations with them about that. Are there any other questions from the committee?
Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and go with some public comment then. Let me switch over. Okay, so first of all, I will say that there have been a lot of comments in the chat, especially in favor of multimodal options, sidewalks.
Okay, Aria, I would ask that we kind of go through those when we get to the section regarding drafting the recommendation. So if for now we could just stick to the questions, then we'll make sure we hit all the comments in favor of whatever they're in favor of.
Okay, so let's go straight to questions then. We had a couple. Let's see here. I did answer a few while the chat was going, but I will read those as well just so that you have a chance to respond as well. We have one from Amanda Estes who asks, will it take another 40 years to update this plan in the future? Maybe we should shoot for far above best practices.
Yeah, so that is a good question. As Amanda kind of references, the current plan we have is a little bit old. Well, it's a lot of bit old, actually. But yes, the plan is to kind of try to revisit this plan every maybe 5 or 10 years. So right now, what we're seeing is a very major overhaul from our old plan. But we're hoping that this will get us to a better place, and that as we work to revamp this, it can be on a better time cycle every maybe 5 to 10 years, which is a little more consistent with what our timeline is for updating things like our Metropolitan Transportation Plan.
Okay. We have another question from Clinton Alexander, who asks about one of the examples you showed of a cross-section of right-of-way. I think okay. Would this example design of an urban street use sharrows for bicycle traffic?
Okay, so you're talking about this. So it sounds to me like Clinton would suggest sharrows for bicycle traffic in this. And yes, that would be something that would be allowed on this type of street, absolutely. Sharrows, for those who don't know, are a great way to remind people that cyclists do have a right to the roadway too. And an urban setting would absolutely be a place that would be very appropriate for that. So this might be the type of place where we would see sharrows. Absolutely, that's a good point. Thank you for raising that.
Okay, yeah, Katie Watson had a similar question asking where would cyclists go in these plans? On the road, question mark.
Yeah, so it does depend on what infrastructure is provided. So this doesn't show every possible cross section. But one thing that would happen here is that the parking wouldn't necessarily be on both sides of the street. It is possible that there could be parking on one side and a bicycle lane on the other side. That would be another option that would be allowed in this type of design. Again, it kind of depends on what we would want, but sharrows may be one option for this type of design. Putting a bicycle lane on one side could be another option. Putting bicycle lanes on both sides could be an option, as well as replacing one of these sidewalks with a shared use path, a trail. That could also be an option as well. Like I said, part of what this plan is trying to do is to create different options and make sure that all the users have a space to be. And what that looks like is going to vary from area to area, but kind of the overall goal of this plan would be to accommodate for all those users. So that's what we're shooting for. And I do want to mention that, again, these are just examples. They aren't comprehensive of what things look like in every situation. So just wanted to make sure that's clear, but thank you for your comment.
Okay, we had a question about, I think, more of the every situation here. Clinton Alexander asks, is there a design example for a suburban or semi-rural street?
Yes, so there are several design examples and different tables and standards in the plan. I didn't want to cover everything tonight because I thought that would be a little bit of information overload. So I just picked these two because they're kind of on the, the different extremes, so to speak, an urban versus rural context. But there absolutely are standards and examples for streets in between these two types of designs. And they would still have some of the same elements. They just might have different widths of the elements. So for example, instead of 11-foot lanes, you might see 11.5-foot lanes. In more of a suburban type of area, you might see 5-foot sidewalks instead of 6. You would still see buffer zones in that type of area though, but they might not be 7.5 feet. So all those things do tie into other local design standards that are available. And there are provisions for them. So that was a very good question. Thank you.
Okay. Katie Watson asks a more maintenance related question here. Is there any requirement for upkeep, stroke replacement of existing sidewalks, et cetera, in this plan? There are a lot of really rough sidewalks in Lafayette that are barely usable and definitely not accessible to everyone.
Yes, so this plan itself is only triggered when development occurs. So if someone comes in, they want to do a new project, that would then be the trigger to make it so that it could conform to these standards if it does not already. As far as sidewalk maintenance itself, this plan does not have any budgetary authority, so to speak, in terms of allocating funds. That is something that would be more under the purview of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan that we talked about earlier. And that planning process is also underway as well currently. So if you're interested in sidewalk maintenance, I would encourage you to watch out for any opportunities for feedback we give about the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and then speak up to raise your concerns about those sorts of things. So that would kind of be the place where maintenance would be addressed. This plan just addresses what happens when development or redevelopment occurs.
Okay, I see 2 more questions here. One from Clinton Alexander, who asks, will government engineers be required to consult recommendations from the League of American Bicyclists or other pedestrian stroke cyclist organizations in deciding how to incorporate bicycle infrastructure?
So as far as following those standards, the standards they would be required to follow are those that would be put in place by either local ordinances or by anything that the Department of Transportation says. So if there's a road that the Department of Transportation has authority over, as opposed to the local government engineers, then they would have the say on that road. So that would be out of the government engineer's jurisdiction. But when the government engineer does have jurisdiction over a road, they would be subject to any local ordinances. However, as long as local ordinances, permit recommendations from the League of American Bicyclists, which, as far as I know, they should mostly do that. They should be in line with those because that's good engineering practice. Then that would be what we would hope we would see. I personally cannot promise you that everything will be perfect 100% of the time, especially when kind of retrofits are put in existing areas where there are tight right-of-ways and we may not be able to get everything quite as wide as we want. That would be an example of where this might be a bit of a challenge. It's kind of paying for past mistakes, past decisions we've made, so to speak, in terms of design. But I will say that from talking to the local government engineers, that they are on board with including that type of infrastructure in developments, and they do want to see those things built. It's just a matter of making sure that we do the best we can with what we have. And there may be some times when it's going to be a little harder than other times to get that implemented, but we're going to give it the best shot that we can, given the constraints we're dealing with.
Okay, last question here. This one is from Meredith Eileen. Is having a shelter at a bus stop something that's an EDA requirement? If so, will this be something that's going to be updated, and when?
Yes. So as far as putting together ADA requirements, bus stops are required to be accessible. So what that means can vary from stop to stop. A shelter itself is not always required. So what we're looking at specifically with this plan is what might trigger a shelter to be required to make the area more transit friendly. So maybe if there is, let's say, for example, a new high-rise development like we've seen in West Lafayette, is that something that would be sufficient to say, okay, we want this area to be served by transit because of the parking requirements for it. We know that not everyone who lives in that type of apartment or building or whatever will have access to their own personal vehicle. So those might be people that want to use transit. So is that enough to trigger, that kind of shelter, or would it maybe be an area where we feel like we want to improve safety by including a shelter with lights and benches, or is it just a matter of how many riders are in an area, or what would be triggering it? And so that's what we're kind of trying to work through right now. Would be those types of considerations. But currently, obviously, anyone who's used the bus system knows that not every bus stop has a shelter. City Bus has been working to put more in on some of their existing stops. They have a project to construct several that's underway right now. But even that project is still not going to have 100% of their stops have shelters. What we're trying to do with this plan is to see if we have some opportunities to get those shelters in when they're needed earlier on, so that we don't have to go back later and go through the funding process and spend a lot of time to get a shelter in where a shelter really should have been there the whole time. So that's kind of what this plan is aiming for. And again, I should mention that this plan is triggered when new development or redevelopment occurs.
Okay, 2 more questions just snuck in here.
Okay.
I'll do these a little bit out of order because I think you were just addressing this second question here. Emily Ramez asks, why do bus stops vary re-accessibility? Would part of this plan include standardizing this?
Yeah, so again, part of this, the reason why bus stops vary is that some of the design standards and practices over the years have changed. So it's one of those situations where sometimes something gets designed a certain way without as much forethought as we would have if we designed it today with some of the better information, some of the better laws, regulations that we have. So then it's a matter of going back and trying to retrofit some of those areas. So that's kind of how they occur. And what this plan does try to do is, when we include new shelters, make sure that they are accessible, which the bus company is 100% on board with. I will say, we've talked to them, and they absolutely want the shelters to be things that all users can use, as well as making sure that there are provisions for their access program, which is a program that they use to pick up riders who qualify for it, who may have some of their own mobility challenges, which is a separate sort of program that they run. But yeah, so we would hope that this would standardize both bus pull-offs and potentially have a little more uniformity at bus stops. But as far as retrofitting goes, that could be a bit of a challenge, as I've addressed a few times.
Okay, last question I think here. Katie Watson asks, will there be any requirements / recommendations to new developers to have grocery stores / essential services nearby, or increased transit options so people without cars can get groceries / to the doctor / etc.?
Yeah, so this plan does not regulate land uses. That is something that is covered more by our zoning ordinance. So this plan really just regulates more so of the transportation. It will be tied into our subdivision ordinance. So one of the reasons why that's important is that when a new subdivision goes in, we want to make sure that we encourage some of the sidewalks that I was talking about earlier, so that people can get from their home to whatever destinations they might want to go to that are nearby. And it may be that there are some situations where we might have a sidewalk around the perimeter of a subdivision, and then that leads to a trail that someone could use safely to get to maybe a strip center, and then there would be pickup sidewalks again on that strip center. So increasing that connectivity, it's more so what the plan is about, as opposed to the regulating the land use. That's not really under the jurisdiction of this plan.
Okay, it looks like that's all the questions at this point. Your comments, we have those here, and it sounds like we'll go over those at the end.
Tim, this is Amy. I have a quick question.
Oh, yep, go ahead, Amy.
You just talked about connectivity with walking infrastructure. Is that same consideration going to be applied to biking for connectivity?
Yes, so that's one of the places where the trail standards are very big. So because we have trails that can be used both by pedestrians and cyclists, and we have an established trail plan, in the plan itself, we have like a master map, I guess you'd say, of all the trails that are planned. And if you were to look at that map, then you would see a lot more connectivity than what you see now. So that would be one of the main places where we could really get some benefit for bicyclists, I think, would be through the trail portion of the plan. But also, yeah, when we're looking at things like just bicycle lanes or even sharrows, that would be another thing that this plan wants to improve. And like I mentioned earlier, those types of amenities are more at the discretion of the local government engineer. So that would be part of the process when a new project comes in, is looking at, okay, what bicycle facilities do we have, and bicycle and pedestrian facilities do we have around this new project that can get people to and from there, and then what are the gaps that might have to be addressed for them to get to and from that area, or maybe from that area to a major activity center. So those types of things would be addressed, yes.
Great, thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question, Amy. Does anyone else on the committee have questions?
We did get one more question here in the chat.
Okay, go
All
ahead.
right, I was just typing the answer to it, but I'll let you do it live. Katie Watson asks, so increased transit service stroke recommendations for bus routes wouldn't be included in this plan either?
Yes, that's correct. That is something that's under city buses jurisdiction. We do not regulate that.
Okay, I think that's all the questions at this time. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so with that, what we're looking to do next is to kind of draft a recommendation to our two committees with what is important to the public. So what I would like is to kind of get, I guess, these various topic areas that I have listed on this last slide here, and see what things that I talked about that you guys are interested in, and what types of things might be gaps or missing, or things that we didn't address, or whatever you guys think is important to comment about. Now is your chance. So I think maybe we'll take recommendations from the committee first, and then we'll see if we missed anything that the public comments gave that the committee didn't say. And then we'll kind of try to mesh those two together to make sure we have a complete picture of what everyone is interested in.
This is Lynn. It seems like there's a great deal, and personally, there's a great deal of interest in bike lanes and in connectivity and the trails and accessibility with the sidewalks and all of that.
Yes. Yeah, there is. Is that something you're saying that you think we would like to keep? Am I hearing you right on that? I don't want to put
Yeah,
words in your mouth.
I'm just speaking very strongly in favor of all of those.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's what I thought, but just wanted to make sure I wasn't misquoting
that's fine.
you. Okay. All right. Yeah. So connectivity and accessibility. Yes, we'll definitely include that in our recommendation. Those are two key points.
This is Shannon speaking. I strongly support the loading zones and making, safe conditions for workers and for passing. And then I'd also say I as a committee member, I'd be totally fine with taking looking at the comments from the community for sake of time, because we're getting to 7. And as a committee member, I can stay longer and kind of, after hearing what the committee or the community has to say, add in anything else as a committee member that I hear. But I think a lot of my opinions, as Lynn said, is going to be echoed by the community. So wanting to hear from them first.
Okay, that's fair. I'm fine with that. So why don't we go ahead and do that then? Aria, if you want to start going through the comments, and I will record those.
Okay, I'll go ahead and just read these chronologically then.
Okay, that works.
Looks like we only have comments from YouTube thus far, so let's see here. Our first comment is Ian Andrews, who says, woohoo, exclamation point, love multimodal options. Are you going to write these down or should I copy and paste these for you?
If you want to copy and paste them, that would be a good idea. I am taking notes, but it never hurts to have these on two sources. Yeah,
Okay.
so as far as multimodal options, what I would say is the way that would be incorporated into the recommendation is that people can get from origins to destinations using many different types of travel, many different modes of travel. So we would want to make sure that if someone wants to bicycle from A to B one day, that person could do that. But if that person wants to walk that same way the next day, they could do that. And then if on the weekend or some other day, they would want to, take transit to make that same trip, they would have all of those options as well. So the way that it would be worded, just so everyone knows, and the recommendation would be something along those lines.
Okay, our next comment is Haley Steidinger, who says, yes, exclamation point. I live 0.8 miles from a grocery store and cannot walk there safely.
Okay, so then yes, it sounds like you would be in favor of the perimeter sidewalks and getting to specific destinations such as grocery stores or shopping centers or whatever. Any place you would want to walk, which could be many places. So getting the perimeter sidewalks and connectivity as well, as was mentioned earlier.
Okay, Clinton Alexander says, PROAG standards are the way to go, exclamation point.
Okay, so keep PROAG. That's glad that you affirmed that. We agree. But yes, so PROAG, we will include that in the recommendation. Thank you, Clinton.
Okay, Julie Lynn says, agreed on needing sidewalks around the perimeter of subdivisions. We have sidewalks in our neighborhood, but it is 1/4 mile walk on a busy road without a sidewalk in order to get to the county walking paths, stroke trails.
Right. Yeah, that's, again, something that we're going to try to do and something we will absolutely include in the recommendation to the committees. So thank you for reiterating that.
Okay. Haley Steidinger says, it's similar for us as well in response to that last comment.
Okay, so same thing. Yeah, got it.
Yes. Let's see, question. Okay, Julie Lynn says, agreed that shelters should be present on most, if not all, bus stops.
Yes, and like I mentioned earlier, we know that that is something that is important to City Bus and that they are working on getting more shelters in place. And as far as how we can get shelters in place with development, that is something that we will bring up to them and see, what thoughts they have. But I know that philosophically they're absolutely on board with getting more shelters and finding creative ways to get infrastructure in place that people can use and that make the bus stops more attractive to more users and more user friendly. But yeah, we
Okay.
will include some discussion on that in the recommendation. I think probably what the recommendation will have is that we will recommend that we need to get a specific recommendation on that figured out with City Bus that has their approval. So I think that would be the way to word that one.
Okay. Katie Watson says, definitely needed at all bus stops, especially those where there isn't anything else around for shelter.
Okay, thank you. That's, yep.
Clinton Alexander says, we should try to have bus shelters wherever they will fit.
Yeah, so it sounds like the bus shelters are a very popular item that we will definitely need to discuss, which we will.
Indeed. We have some more comments here. Amanda Estes says, we love green infrastructure, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point.
Yes, the green infrastructure recommendations will be included to both committees. And I will mention that at the conference I referenced that occurred yesterday, both of the mayors were there, at least for part of that. conference, so they were involved, and I don't want to speak for them, but from the conversations I've had with them, I think philosophically they're on board with trying to increase the standards and get more green infrastructure more consistently in place. It's just a matter of making sure that the plan clearly explains how that needs to happen and in what situations that needs to happen, and how we can make sure that there are provisions for those things where they are needed.
Okay,
Thank
and I'll add to that, Tim, that the conference yesterday, I'm still editing the videos, but hopefully those should be up tomorrow. We'll see on YouTube. So if you check the county government YouTube, you should be able to watch the video and listen to the mayor's comments on that subject on their session there, the first one in the morning.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Aria. Yeah, this conference was a virtual conference that was recorded. There were also some other good sessions about other topics. One of them that might be of interest to people who are looking for green infrastructure requirements would be a couple of other ones that occurred in the morning. There was one by a Purdue professor that kind of talked about some of the need for really why some of this stuff is important and why green infrastructure is important, and what can be done for the transportation sector to work on lowering some of those harmful emissions and all those nasty things that we hear about, as well as one from Federal Highway about sustainability and resilience and design. So either of those two sessions might be of interest to people who want to learn more about that topic. So I would point you to those once those get uploaded. They are pretty large files, so that is why they're taking some time to get up, but we are hoping to have them up by the end of the week.
Yeah, each session's 30 to 40 or so minutes. Anyway, another comment, Julie Lynn replying to Amanda Estes there says, yes, yes, exclamation point, exclamation point.
Okay, yep, so yes, the green infrastructure, very important.
Yes. Katie Watson says, sustainable infrastructure is really exciting. Really happy you're looking into this, particularly plants to help with flooding and trees to cool spaces, particularly downtown.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up, Katie. That is absolutely something we want to keep looking at, and something that may continue to be updated as we go through future update cycles to this plan. So hopefully we can get to a point where those become the norm, especially in the downtown area. Yeah, we would love to see a better, more walkable, safer downtown that's environmentally friendly.
Yep. Emily Ramis says, shelters, heated shelters, exclamation point. Maybe an interactive map or a way to power phones. Could be solar powered.
Okay, so talking about providing amenities within the shelter. So that would be something that we would include in the conversation with City Bus. Okay, thank you for that comment, Emily. We will note that.
Okay, in response to Emily, Amanda Estes says, brilliant ideas, exclamation point, exclamation point.
Yeah, those are good ideas. I agree.
All right, I think we have a couple more comments here. Let me keep scrolling. Clinton Alexander just said that they would like to know the answer to the question that Katie Watson asked, where would cyclists go in these plans on the road, which you answered. Okay. Julie Lynn says, oh wait, did I skip one? Nope, that was my comment. Julie Lynn says, bike lanes are very important to me as well, exclamation point.
Yes, yeah, bike lanes are often a very good solution, and we have certainly seen more of those within the past, let's say, 10 years or so. But at the same time, we acknowledge that, like we were talking about earlier, connectivity is a very important part of this plan, and looking at what is available around an area is important. And there may be times when there's a gap in bike lanes that we hope this plan can address some of those gaps to make it so that people won't have to go from an area with a bike lane to an area where they feel unsafe biking. You know, that's the kind of thing we want to eliminate with this plan. So yeah, we would absolutely include bike lanes in our recommendations.
Okay. Haley Steidinger says, the bus stop at our neighborhood is in the grass adjacent to the ditch.
Yes, so that is something that is very definitely not ideal. I'll just start there. So we know that from talking to City Bus that they are working to eliminate those types of stops. One thing that is a little bit unfortunate is that there are enough of those that currently, at least, there isn't enough money within the project that I mentioned earlier to get all of those areas where that happens. So it's something that will be worked on over time, and we hope as redevelopment comes in, that will address some of those situations so that we can, you know, get something that's more ADA friendly, because obviously something that's, you know, on grass is not very easy for someone with a mobility challenge to get to. So that's a gap. You're absolutely right.
Okay. Amanda Estes says, there's a bus stop along 18th Street that is in someone's yard and there is no sidewalk. Poor design for sure.
Yes, yeah. Yep, I will concede that. And yeah, that's again one of those historic things that has happened that we hope won't happen as much anymore.
Okay. Katie Watson said, thank you for your response to their question on increased transit service stroke recommendations for bus route wouldn't be included in this plan either, which you answered. Amanda Estes says, I strongly support sustainability stroke green infrastructure, trails, connectivity, and accessibility, exclamation point.
All right. We will make sure that those are included. I think we already have all those down, but you know, it never hurts to have another voice reminding us. Yeah, so that's great. Thank you, Amanda.
Okay. Tony Brindley says, thank you for your presentation, exclamation point. Increased accessibility will greatly improve our city.
Yeah, so kind of echoing what we talked earlier about ProAg, which will absolutely be included, Tony.
Okay. Katie Watson says, I strongly support sustainable stroke green infrastructure as well. Accessibility, including bus stops and sidewalks, and more stroke safer, stroke connecting bike lanes, stroke routes in the perimeter sidewalks.
Yeah, thank you for that. The connectivity and safety. Safety is one of the big reasons why we want connectivity. I think I've mentioned that a few times, but while I have the chance and this is being recorded, I just want to reiterate that that's one of the major reasons why we're pushing for connectivity is, you know, we would hate to see a situation where someone could maybe ride safely on a trail and then safely go off onto a bike path, and then they just get to nothing for a mile before their destination, and they're in an unsafe situation and they end up being involved in a crash or something that would be terrible, that we would never like to see. So that's one of the things we're aiming for with this plan, is to really get a better, more connected multimodal network. So I just want to reiterate that those are some of the reasons why we're looking at these things.
Okay, Haley Steidinger says, thank you for allowing us to listen and provide feedback on these plans, exclamation point. I look forward to being more up to date on this topic.
Yeah, so one thing I did want to mention is that this is only the kind of first opportunity for public feedback. This is not the only opportunity for public feedback. There will be more opportunities. We want to make sure that, you know, this is something that's not just plan made by some guy sitting in his office, right? But it's something that the community wants, that provides benefit to it. So that's one of the reasons why we're trying to get feedback, not only tonight, but we will be looking for more feedback in the future. And we hope that not only the people that are here tonight joining us and giving feedback, but that other people will we'll see this will get spread around, and then we can get more great ideas like we've had from you guys on the committee, as well as some of our commenters on our stream.
Yeah, and this is a quarterly meeting, is that right, CPC?
Yes, this is a quarterly meeting, so our next meeting will be in December. So our regular schedule is the second Wednesday of the month. This one got pushed back to today due to some technical difficulties that we had with our streaming equipment on the second Wednesday of this month. We didn't want to run this meeting without the chance to gather feedback on this plan, because that's obviously one of the important things we're talking about. So that's why it got delayed to today. But normally it's the second Wednesday every third month, and December will be the next one.
Yep, and you can check the county government website, the agendas page, and we post those agendas usually a week in advance of each meeting. And I believe our current agenda has the date for the next meeting. Is that right? Listed on it?
Yes, it does. It is on the current agenda. I will just go ahead and say it's December 9th would be the date. So if anyone's interested in that, I will mention that one thing we will be talking about at that meeting is our transportation improvement program, which is one of the main mechanisms that gets funding to transportation projects. So if you're interested in learning about what's going on in the community and where some of our federal dollars are going and how those are being spent, we will have one of our transportation planners, our senior planner, Doug Pode, joining us at that meeting, and he will let us know what's going on with that and where we're at in that process. So if that's something that's of interest to you, that will be something that will be discussed at the next meeting.
Okay, so some more public comments here. Alex Mason says, I am visually impaired, unable to drive, and I greatly appreciate when there are separate bike paths, or at the very least, bike lanes that connect to other bike lanes or paths. I'm not super comfortable riding in the street, Sheriff style, so any way to limit the amount of in-street biking, if at all possible, would be greatly, greatly appreciated.
Okay, thank you very much for that comment, Alex. We really appreciate hearing from someone who can be helped by this directly. So thank you for sharing that. And we will absolutely include that in this recommendation. And like I said, you know, conforming to design standards for users with those types of challenges is something we really want to beef up, and why we're following ProAg.
Okay. Tony Brinley says 7.5-foot buffer zones will give great locations for the transit committee to add or optimize bus stops. This also gives room for shelters.
Yeah, so as far as the buffer zones, currently those are subject to local ordinances. So what the plan itself actually says is that when a sidewalk is installed, buffer zones must be installed subject to relevant local ordinances, basically. And then 7.5 feet, like I said, is the maximum. And we will see that in some places, of course, but that may be something that, as part of this plan, that we encourage the local jurisdictions to revisit. As the Area Plan Commission, we cannot mandate that they do that, but we can give that suggestion and see if that's something that there might be a desire for them to discuss and maybe modify or look at and kind of bring to a different sort of standard or different way of looking at that. So that's something that we'll mention in this recommendation. But I do want to say, just for the sake of transparency, that it will not always be a 7.5-foot buffer, that the buffers are subject to relevant local ordinances. So this plan just ties to those other local ordinances.
Okay. Clinton Alexander says, thank you for providing the forum for public feedback on this plan and for taking the time to hear and respond to comments and questions, exclamation point.
Yes, well, thank you and everyone else. I know there are several people who have been very active in giving us comments, which is great. That's why we had this meeting. You know, we wanted this kind of first level of high level broad feedback. And we hope that we can provide times when people will be available to give more detailed feedback before this plan gets finalized, so that we can get something that's really good for the community and makes it a more livable, more attractive, environmentally friendly place.
Okay, my Facebook has frozen momentarily, so give me a sec here to get those public comments back up. I guess while I'm waiting on that, I will note that this meeting is typically in person. We're just doing it this way because of our distancing requirements and whatnot. We do still allow a couple folks to come in and participate in person here as well. Okay, got Facebook back here. Okay, Clinton Alexander has another comment. Oh dear. Okay, there we go, fixed. Clinton Alexander has another comment responding to Alex's comment about the preference against sharrows, saying, this is an excellent point, exclamation point. In-street biking should not be the first choice for bike infrastructure. We should emphasize safer and separate bike infrastructure wherever possible, exclamation point.
Yeah, separated bike infrastructure is something that this plan would certainly encourage with tying into the trail component with the connectivity. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Clinton. That's very important. So thank you again for reiterating that. We do appreciate that.
Okay, Katie Watson says, responding to that same comment by Alex, definitely agree, exclamation point. I've had cars get really close to me when on roads with sharrows or just not see me.
Yeah, although sharrows are better than nothing and may be appropriate in some situations, there is a reason why those are kind of in the category of being at the discretion of the local government engineer, whereas the plan has much more defined standards for the sidewalks, trails, those sorts of things. We also see those as a preferred option where available.
Okay. Katie Watson has a comment saying, thank you for providing this forum and for making it accessible virtually, exclamation point. Thank you. I think those are all the comments I see on Facebook. I didn't see any on YouTube when I checked. I still don't see any on YouTube. So I think those are all of our comments at this time.
Okay, so in that case, why don't we go ahead and go back to the committee and then they can have a chance to give any comments. And then Aria, if we get any more on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, then we'll make sure to address those before we adjourn the meeting.
Okay, I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you. All right, so committee, we're going to kick it back over to you. So if you guys have anything that you would like to add that hasn't already been emphasized, please go ahead.
All right, this is Gene. On the bus pull-offs or just the bus stops, a bus pull-off takes up huge amounts of room in the buffer zone or parking area or another lane or whatever. So it's not going to be used at every bus stop for sure. So there needs to be a way to get from the sidewalk to the bus safely and accessibly. So if you have to go down a curb, squeeze between parked cars, stuff like that, there just needs to be a clear place for the bus stop if there isn't a pull off where people can get from the sidewalk to the bus.
Yes, thank you. That's a great point. You're absolutely right that it is not always feasible to provide a pull-off for the bus. So that is something that we will continue to have to work out, and something that I think will be included in our conversations with City Bus, as we mentioned earlier. But thank you for bringing that up specifically. That's always good to make sure that we're comprehensive in what we're looking at here. All right, are there any other comments from the committee?
Yeah, this is Shannon. I really support having like having wider sidewalks whenever possible. It was interesting to learn about the 5 feet 7 inches, and it reminds me of when I had to use crutches, how narrow sidewalks, and honestly even 5 feet sidewalks maybe weren't wide enough for the lot of walking that I had to do to get to the bus and to other places. So I really support those wide sidewalks. 5 feet a minimum sounds nice, but 6 feet wherever we could possibly have them, I think would make for even more comfortable experiences for folks in neighborhoods. I believe it was said by many folks, but also just really wanting to reiterate loving that idea of sidewalks at the perimeters of subdivisions and developments so that we can safely get to places and encourage more trips for things that are short or long, but especially those short trips as other folks shared, right? Being close to places, but not being able to get to them because there's no safe walking path. I'm trying to look at my notes. If someone else on the committee has anything to share, I'll pause here. Oh, I'm wondering if in the clear zones, if there's anything that we can do. Loving the sustainability in the and our clear zones, but to really promote trees in those spaces as a really cost-effective form of green infrastructure that has really wonderful benefits for cooling the air and making comfortable conditions. So loving green infrastructure overall, but also a big plug for the trees, I guess is my comment. If that's something that makes sense for this plan.
Yeah, I think it would. So if I'm going to hop back a couple slides here. So this is something that I think is a really good design because it provides not only trees, but it also, as you can see, it has some nice outdoor seating. So this is really what we would like to see in a downtown type of environment where people are, where they want to have activities, and where you can see provisions for lots of different activities. There are ways people can get here multimodally. We see the little piece of the bike rack there in the bottom corner where someone could park a bike. We see some people using the sidewalk. We see people sitting outside this restaurant. We see some green infrastructure. So yeah, this is what we would love to see with this plan. And I think as far as trees specifically, that's something that I will include in the recommendation for discussion, and we will see what our committees had to say about that, and what we can do to maybe make that appropriate in terms of tying in with other local ordinances and making sure that, this plan doesn't step on anything good that is being done by other local ordinances and other laws and rules that have been passed by our local jurisdictions.
Okay.
And also, I do want to mention one thing we're hoping to get with this plan is uniformity between the jurisdictions. We know that even though we have a river between the two cities, that people want to go across that all the time. People love to take trips to and from campus or to and from West Lafayette to Lafayette. There are a lot of reasons to go to both communities. They're both great communities, and so having uniform standards between the two is really pretty important. So that's another thing that we're going to hopefully continue to see more of. And from my personal experience, I will say that I think that our elected officials have done a great job of working together to be in step on these types of things. We're really continuing to see a lot of improvement and just a great spirit of working together here in our community. And we hope that that will continue with some of these design standards. And so we will absolutely encourage that conversation about trees specifically, as well as some of these other things that people have called out that are very, very helpful.
Mm-hmm. With that, I wanted to highlight something else that I heard you speak about tonight. The supporting road, I guess I really support roads that, drain properly to prevent flooding and also to protect, the Wabash River. And I think preventing flooding is also important as we think about winter coming, right? Preventing flooding and preventing freezing. So as we think about safety for all users, if we have roads and sidewalks that are draining properly, then they're then they're not going to freeze over and create unsafe conditions for anyone biking on the road, driving, walking, what have you. So that's an exciting part of the plan that I want to just express some support for as we're making the recommendation.
Yes. So I will mention that this plan doesn't, or sorry, this presentation doesn't cover that, but the plan does in terms of design standards. Here's the one I was looking for. So the drainage and technical design standards in terms of grades, things of those nature, are covered in the plan. I did not include those tonight because that's a little bit more of a technical thing that'll maybe be of more interest to engineers and those sorts of people than this audience. But the general philosophy is to kind of have stricter, stronger requirements for those things than the last plan did to make sure that we are being environmentally friendly and keeping our river clean and keeping that as a great amenity for our community, and seeing just the value of the river and how it can be a great asset.
Great.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Yeah, did we have another comment? On?
No, but just to comment on that comment.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
During the MPO conference, a couple of the sessions touched on some efforts we're making to preserve and protect our Wabash River here and other drainage. So if you'd like to hear, more details, some projects that we've done locally, you can watch those presentations once they're uploaded here.
Yeah, the MPO conference is what happened yesterday. That's another name for the conference that happened yesterday, just so no one's confused. We're still talking about the same one that we were talking about before.
Okay.
But otherwise, yes, I'm not seeing any more comments here.
Okay, well, that's
Facebook
fine.
or YouTube.
Yeah, if people on the committee still have any comments that I missed or weren't included in the public comment section or anything else that we want to include in the recommendation to our two boards, it looks to me like we've gotten most of the things that are on my slide here as kind of prompts, but I do want to make sure that everyone has a chance to get heard. So I don't want to close this out too early. So if you do have anything else, please feel free to speak up.
This is Gene. I have one more on the mention of trees. The size of that tree planting area has a lot to do with what species of trees can be planted.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a real narrow area, you plant very little trees that give very little benefit, like crab apples that you can't walk under and grow out into the sidewalks and the streets. Or you get it bigger, you can plant more useful trees that fit better and things like that. So that the width of that space has a lot to do with what vegetation you can put in there. And trees are definitely the easiest vegetation to care for, because if you put in a lot of other vegetation, it requires seasonal maintenance in many cases.
Yes, thank you. That's a good point. So as far as trees, I will say what the plan is aiming to do currently is, especially in downtown areas where we do have those wider buffer clear zones, those are areas where we really hope to see more trees. And like Gina is saying, that would be a great place for the bigger / more useful kind of trees. But that's absolutely a great point. Thank you for bringing that up, Gene.
I guess I just also want to say, formally as a committee member, if you said you need things from the committee, but really loved hearing from the broad community tonight and really echo their desires, for this comprehensive plan that's going to improve connectivity and create multimodal transportation options to really accommodate all users for our community. Just from the committee.
Yes, thank you for that. I did want to mention, I'm not sure if I've been super clear on this or not. So just for the record, so once this recommendation gets drafted, the plan is to not only take it to both committees and then see what they have to say. But then something will come back to this committee at our next committee meeting. So in our December meeting, the December 9th meeting, we'll kind of, hear what progress has been made in this area, not only with the plan, but with some of these recommendations as well. So just so that everyone understands what the process is. I know it's not always easy to, know what processes are. So I wanted to make sure that that was stated for the record so that people who are on the committee and who are listening to the stream or perhaps watching the recording of this can be aware of what the process is. And also that this is not the only opportunity for public feedback on this plan, that there will be more opportunities. And so, yeah.
Okay, and with that, I don't see any more comments on either Facebook nor YouTube. I did post a link to our YouTube channel here on Facebook and make it easier to find that. So that's it from me, I think.
Okay, well, I just want to give one final opportunity for anyone on the committee then to say anything. I think we probably got everything, but just in case.
This is Amy. I think it all sounds great.
All right, thank you, Amy. glad to hear that from you. Okay, so then hearing no other comments about the thoroughfare plan, we will move to section 3 of our meeting, which is the question, comments, and suggestions section, which this is actually a little different from what we just did. This section is more about questions about what you might like to see otherwise, aside from the thoroughfare plan stuff. So maybe if I missed something with the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, for example, or if you have perhaps a grievance against how this meeting was run, which is fair, you are absolutely allowed to do that. This would be the time for those.
I
And
just want
also-
to make sure that all the online comments that the nice person whose name I didn't catch, if we were able to copy those so we have it on the record.
Yes, I did copy and paste every comment that was made here. So Tim will have a copy of those. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, and thank you to
For some
Aria
reason,
for
Screen, they
doing that.
disappeared, like it only showed 4 at a time. So I was hoping that you got the early ones.
Yes, I believe I got all of them.
Great.
This is Gene. I think you did a marvelous job of running it under the circumstances that we have of tying the committee and the public and whatnot through all these different medias. I think is a great move to try to get everybody involved and getting the most input that you can get.
Yeah, thank you for that. We really appreciate hearing that from you. All right, last chance for comments. All right, Aria, did we hear any more comments on YouTube or Facebook? Okay, I'm seeing a no. All right, well, with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Our next meeting is December 9th, 6 p.m. My expectation is that that will also be a virtual meeting. I do not know that for sure. We will be distributing information about that when it gets closer to that date and we have more concrete information. But if I had to guess, my guess would be that it will again be a virtual meeting using these same platforms. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that. All right, well, with that, we're adjourned, and thank you everyone on the committee and everyone who tuned into the streams and gave us some comments. We look forward to hearing your continued comments about this plan so that we can get a good plan in place that helps the community. So thank you all, and everyone have a great night. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Night.